Morning, everybody. Hello, and welcome to the third edition of the Collections Technology Think Tank series. It's not easy for me to say that. My name's Colin White. I'm the founder of Credit Connect Media, and in this edition, in what we call the Online Collections Technology Think Tank 2.1, we're going to aim to bring together collections professionals and discuss collection strategies, assess whether technological innovations can play a role in producing the best customer outcome, as we hope you are emerging from what is the worst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which I'm sure we're fed up of hearing about, but it's a reality of our part of our daily business now, unfortunately. At today's event, we've got 4 sessions planned, and here's an outline of those sessions. If you just bear me a second, I'm just going to change my screen. So as you can see, session 1, we're going to be starting shortly. That's going to focus on customer engagement. We're going to have a break around about 10:25, and then the next session will be on affordability and vulnerability. 11:30 we'll have a break, and we'll have a session on 11:55 looking at open banking and collections, an interesting subject, like they all are, and then round off 1 p.m. On business transformation. So those of you logged in, you obviously see that you've logged into the one session. What you need to do in order to view the other sessions is have a look on your control panel in front of you, which I'll run through in a minute, and that's got a link for you to sign up for the next one. If you haven't already, if you have already, then you'll have the links already ready to go. All of these panels, think tanks, are based on panel discussions. This one's got 4 people in, and we've got the break around them just so that we can take a breath between each one and focus on different areas. Obviously, no doubt 2021 has been a pivotal year for collections teams and businesses as we continue to venture into the unknown landscape of this year and the world of collections, and it's challenging for all of us. And with this in mind, it's not just about our panelists today. We want to get all the feedback from all of you as to what you think about some of the things that we're discussing, and also take part in some of the polls that we've got set up as well. So have a look at your control panel on the left hand side of that. You've got information on today's event, so have a click on that. Also, the second one is a speech bubble. That's got information where you can click on and ask questions. Definitely feel free to do that. It would be great to have your input on this session. Information on our speakers today. There's some great speakers we've got lined up, so you'll see them as well. And then we've got a section called resources where you can download information relating to today's event, and obviously have a look at the information that we've got around some of our supporters for this event, because they've been really great in supporting that. They've got some interesting information which kind of supports some of the discussions that you can see in there. So yeah, have a look at that. And then what we've just wanted to quickly thank before we move forward are today's sponsors who've made this possible. So we've got CallMiner supporting a session later on, Paylink Solutions, Severin, and Ophelos, who are speaking on this session, and especially thanks to Webio, who are our main sponsor for this session as well. Anybody who wants to get involved from a social media perspective, use our hashtag for the day, which is CollectionsTechTT. That's CollectionsTechTT. It'd be great to share that on LinkedIn and Twitter and see if there's any further discussion around that on the socials. In addition to this, as I mentioned, we've got some polls. They'll be appearing over your screen. We're not going to round them up in this session just because of time. But what we'll do post-event, we're going to write a review next Thursday on the Credit Connect website, which includes some of the questions that we don't manage to cover off in this one, and also a roundup of those polls. So it'd be great to have you all involved with that. So anyway, enough from me. Let's crack on with the event. First session, as I mentioned, is sponsored by Webio, and it's on customer engagement. So I'm going to open up the event today and take over as chair. So unfortunately, Vanesa Northam from StepChange was going to be chairing all 4 of our sessions, but she's been battling a sore throat in earache this week and is not well. So I will resume the responsibility of chairing today's event. And of course, we wish Vanesa well and hope that she's okay and gets better soon. So I want to start this session by introducing you to our panelists. And whilst I'm doing that, I'm going to each of them ask them to give their reflections on the last 18 months or so as part of their introduction and a view on what they think the post-panic collections may look like. So I'm going to begin with, I've got Gary from British Gas. Gary, can you hear us, and can you just introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I can hear you, Colin. Hopefully you can hear me too.
Yeah.
Just excellent, good.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Just so everybody knows, Gary's dialed in, so we just had a couple of technical issues, so that's why I said that. But Gary is very much with us. So Gary, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, I'll do that. Yeah, the power of technology, you know, helping us out as always. So yeah, hi there, everyone. Good morning. My name's Gary Moffat, and I'm currently the customer debt operations manager for the British Gas energy arm of Centrica. Sorry, I can't join you by video this morning, like Colin says, but just a little bit about me and what I do. So I've been in the energy industry for around about 17 years now, but I've worked in credit and debt and collections for about 7 of those. Ultimately, I'm responsible, or my teams are responsible for the delivery and effectiveness of our credit and debt strategies across our UK residential portfolio, which is somewhere in the region of about 7 million customers. I'm also responsible for the development and implementation of our key debt policies and standards as well, including things like our credit management policy, and also our contact channels and standards, and also our vulnerability obligations. So customer engagement, you know, in terms of this session, is obviously something that's very important to me. Customer engagement, performance, and also customer perception as well, which I think is something that you know, is extremely important as we sort of come out of the last 18 months. In terms of my reflections on the last 18 months, I won't talk too much in cliches, you know, about how challenging and difficult it's been. I think you know, my reflections, you know, certainly from a business point of view are that you know, we've almost moved away, and I know that I think a lot of organisations will find this. We've almost moved away from, you know, I think longer term strategic thinking, you know, for an extended period of time as we adapt and adjust and you know, almost introduce initiatives that are you know, about dealing with the most immediate, you know, sort of issues and storms that are being generated by everything that's happened throughout the pandemic and the various changes that's caused across different industries. I think just in terms of pulling out a couple of things that, you know, I'm sure we'll touch on today, and things that certainly have certainly been brought into sharper focus, you know, for me and for our business over the last 18 months. I think 2 things in particular. I think vulnerability, you know, is something that will obviously be in sharp focus now. I think in particular, you know, and this is something that we've, you know, really started to find real challenges with as we start to shape our collection paths and strategies in the aftermath of COVID, is the identification of vulnerability. I think I've read that, you know, over 50% of customers, you know, could essentially be classed as vulnerable in some way now. And I think it's really important to start to think about, you know, how we differentiate vulnerabilities, and certainly, you know, vulnerability and financial vulnerability, I think will come into sharper focus in collections, and how we use data to try and drive, you know, more efficient and effective customer journeys in debt, you know, through use of that data. I think identification of vulnerability through more automated means is definitely something that's becoming more prevalent and more readily accepted, I think, as well. You know, the use of things like speech analytics, you know, to sort of I think address and sort of try and reduce the burden of the vulnerability challenge, on businesses. Certainly, I know, from one like ours where we have quite a large customer base, that is something that we need to think more smartly about. The only other thing, Colin, I was going to talk about in terms of the last 18 months is, I know there'll be different emerging risks across different industries, but as the energy representative on the panel, one of the biggest impacts to customer behaviour, is potentially the energy price cap and the various changes that have been happening there. And obviously the sharp rise and recovery in wholesale energy prices that have driven that. I think we've used the term perfect storm probably more times in the last 18 months than ever before. But with furlough ending this quarter, the increased incidence of vulnerability, and I've also read recently in StepChange's most recent reporting that, the proportion of new clients who are behind on household bills is higher than it was pre-pandemic. These are things that we need to be acutely aware of. So that outlook is pretty tough for both customers and businesses. And I think that focus in the utility space will definitely shift to things like sustainability, which is a bit of a buzzword. I know there'll be a lot of them today, but I think it's the duty of businesses to start to work more collaboratively with customers, on how we can make things more affordable for both parties. So I think there'll be a lot of focus on sustainability, how we do things smarter, and obviously trying to make sure that we reduce costs for customers and businesses alike. So that's my sort of initial reflections. I'm sure we'll talk about some more of those things in detail as we go through. But yeah, I think lots going on.
Fantastic.
I think that's fair to say.
No, that's great. That's great, Gary. Thank you. You've obviously got a lot on your plate as an understatement there for me. Jim Appleby from Arrow, if you could give us your introduction, please, that'd be great.
Yes, thanks for the invite. I suppose the ask was how's the last 18 months been? I suppose my reflections probably kind of three phases really in that 18 months. I think there was an initial period where we were definitely scrabbling, and I do remember the first couple of weeks of March being in a contact centre of Arrows, and we were essentially putting PCs in the boots of agents' cars in the middle of the day, with police looking on, going, "What the hell's going on in that building?" And I think everybody was probably doing a similar thing to figure out how to keep business as usual going in those first few days. So I think there's definitely an initial period of scrabbling, and then I think there was a really interesting period where it might be quite a good litmus test for people's collections operations. What were people doing in March, April, May? Because for us, I think a number of people, it was a period of real innovation where we were changing to customer demand, and I think really the collections environment in the UK was split between those that had figured out a work from home model in March, and then were having a real period of innovation to react to customers' requirements. And then I think there was a number of operations that were continuing in April, May, June to try and figure out how to keep some element of business continuity going. So I think that period is really interesting to look at as a litmus test for kind of how flexible the models are that people have deployed. And that was a really exciting period for us at Arrow, because we like to innovate, and the challenges thrown at us were quite relentless during that period. And then I think we're into quite a long tail of just a bit of a new norm, and really the last sort of 9 or 12 months has been a bit more stable and a bit more of a new norm, and we've got used to it. And then I suppose reflecting on what the future holds. I was chairing a CSA event last week, and I think there is almost a universal recognition that there's some form of spike that's due, and it always feels like it's 3 months away, and people have felt it's 3 months away for probably the last 9 months. And indeed, I think in March we were forecasting some form of apocalypse that was going to happen very, very shortly. I think a lot of the government interventions have tempered that, but it's still there. And I think there's a lot of good research that's come out. I do support the view that that spike's coming. We should all be ready. And there's almost an unprecedented number of vulnerable customers that are going to be coming into operations over the next few months, and we need the tools and techniques to be able to deal with that spike and to deal with that customer demand.
Brilliant. No, that's great, Jim. Yeah, no, really interesting. And Amon from Ophelos, if you could introduce yourself as well. You're just on mute, so just take that off for us.
Sure. Thanks, Colin. Thanks for having me.
Nice.
Hey, my name is Amon. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Ophelos. We are a fintech company in the collection space, in essence, acting and operating as a DCA. And for us, the past 18 months have been quite interesting because as a digital-first organization, a lot of the things that Jim just mentioned didn't affect us as much because we have already been kind of set up as a kind of remote team. We have already been set up from a digital perspective. And so what we have seen, generally speaking, right, when you look at our clients and organizations, is that COVID, not only collections, but in other departments, has been the biggest driver for transformation. Because organizations almost have been forced to innovate and transform and adapt to kind of the new ways of working. And the best organizations in my mind have been very successful at that because they have been able to kind of adopt quickly, be it in collections or in other areas of the business. For me, what's quite striking is that it seems that coming out of the pandemic, there are some winners and some pretty clear losers, right? If you look at small businesses, for example, a lot of them are really struggling, especially in certain areas like hospitality and travel. And the same can be said for consumers. You have a certain set of consumers that were actually able to pay down a lot of their debts throughout the pandemic. And there's another set of consumers that were heavily impacted. And while they have been on a furlough scheme, maybe as Jim mentioned, we would expect in the next 3 to 6 months there to be a wave of redundancies, especially in kind of affected industries, and that will then really challenge the industry to see how they can adapt with that upcoming wave. I think as a digital first player for us, it's pretty clear that digital will become more important. And there are a couple of reasons for that. It's our belief that consumers prefer digital. And that's not only, before the pandemic, you might have said, that might affect younger age groups and younger demographics. But I think one thing that has become pretty clear throughout the past 12 to 18 months is that older demographics that traditionally might have not been the first adopters of tech and digital interfaces have been almost forced to do their shopping online, for example, to use QR codes to check into restaurants, to use all these kind of, you want to call it newer digital tools to be part of a functioning society almost. And so, that has brought, with it a change in behavior and a change in preference. And so from our perspective, it's becoming very, very clear that consumers want to and prefer to deal with any type of kind of problems, be it collections or customer support in a digital channel. So that's, I think, from my perspective, one of the clearest reflections. And the other one is, as we come out of this pandemic, companies will ultimately get judged by how they treat customers, specifically vulnerable customers. I think there's going to be much more scrutiny around, how you as an organization interact and engage with your customers, that you show that you're compassionate, you show that empathetic, and that will play a much, much bigger role in the next phase of these kind of changing times.
Okay, that's great. Excuse me. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Amon. And Mark Oppermann from Webio. I guess from your perspective, give us a bit of introduction, but it's more some of the customers you're dealing with. It'd be great to hear that view.
Yeah, it's an interesting one that I was smiling as Jim was talking about putting PCs in boots of cars. When it all kicked off, oh my jeepers, it was everybody head spinning. How are we going to deal with this and all the rest? So yeah, it has certainly been a very interesting times. And actually businesses were sort of battening down the hatches to say, look, just let's keep it going. So the whole idea of innovation probably wasn't at the top of their agenda at the time, but actually the whole sort of pandemic has forced people into sort of looking at how to do things better. And I think rather than going over all the bits that has been said, I think it's clear that the post, and as we get through this, and I absolutely believe that, yeah, with the government furloughs and all the other supports sort of being petered out, it will be post-Christmas before we see that spike. People will just naturally want to get through Christmas, and then I think it'll be let's deal with this stuff now. But what we've seen, and from our own point of view in Webio, and I've been sort of doing this whole customer engagement thing for coming on 20 years, and it's scary when you start to think the numbers, but yeah, it's that long. And really what I've seen over that time, because I've been heavily involved in the collection space and, significantly grown to tech companies and, started Webio a little over 5 years ago. But what I've seen is that over that time is that the technologies have changed. And they've got easier and easier really to engage with people. And from my own philosophy, yeah, tech is what we do, but actually strip away the tech and just think of customers as people. What we should be doing is trying to make it easy for people to engage with you as a business. And the minute you do that, really don't be surprised when they do it over and over. And that's something that we talk to our clients about all the time. It's, trying to make it easy for people to engage with you. And it really does make a difference. But from the pandemic point of view, the drivers that we've seen has sort of played into, like, I'd always say that our business, we operate on three main pillars. The first one being conversational. And what you've seen is a huge shift away from the phone activity. There's more and more digital engagement happening over the likes of, digital channels. And that really has been a huge sort of eye-opener. And the feedback from clients would be, we would have been swamped if this wasn't available, because we just couldn't deal with call waitings and stuff like that. And then really sort of the second pillar would be automation. And that's something that I think the pandemic has been the catalyst to, that you talk to people about automation, and I've been doing this for a number of years, and sort of it's funny that when people are forced to do it, they do it, and then they kind of go 3 months later, oh my God, Mark, that's really good. It really works. And you kind of go, yeah, I've been telling you for 6 months. What do you think? So automation has been something that people have had to embrace. And with digital channels, it is a lot easier to embrace and implement a lot quicker. And then really sort of the final thing that really has, for us, from the sort of the pillars of what we operate on, would be sort of AI and ML. And we've launched our Propensity Studio. And really, that really is for identifying what the outcome of a conversation will be right from the start. Well, within 3 utterances, and it's over 85% accurate. And one of the things that Gary certainly mentioned earlier about vulnerability, that that study, I think it was 53% of people were showing signs of vulnerability. So the likes of, in a digital conversation where you're not listening to somebody on the phone and being able to maybe identify some vulnerability traits, that ability to do that over an SMS, a WhatsApp, a web chat, that type of conversation, identifying it very early on, and then moving it correctly into a rightly skilled agent. So they're the type of things that we're seeing. So certainly at the start, I think every business went through the, oh my jeepers, what's happening here? But I think what you're finding is, as we're coming through this, and especially over the last 6 months, businesses have really started to find their feet, think about sort of how and what the business model is going to be into next year and beyond. And I think really that will be the determining factor where success for businesses. Are they fit for next year and the year beyond? So it'll be definitely an interesting 2 to 3 years happening from I think January next year.
Okay. And I guess focusing on the now a bit more, I mean, everybody's talking about a digital engagement journey in collections, and replacing people, agents with chatbots. Are we seeing that now? Is that starting to happen? Are we seeing a reduction in numbers in centres with engagement, or is it a specific? Jim, is there any kind of example that you've got within Arrow where you've seen engagement and digital channels making a difference internally?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I really don't think that's a new phenomenon, though. I think that's something that's been creeping in over 3 to 5 years, probably. I mean, there can be no one really that's got their 5-year plan open in front of them and is forecasting a growth in contact center FTE. I mean, there needs to be an augmentation of non-voice channels, and it just depends on the drive from customers and the scale of ambition within the company. I mean, the very best, I think, over the medium term are going to be focused on a 90%. 90% non-voice engagement. I think the very best will be targeting that, and even those digital first businesses, it will not be possible to have a digital only business. And digital first is the phrase, because some customers will prefer a voice channel. It will always be with us, and we need to prep for it. But definitely at Arrow, there is a growth in non-voice, and we're helping others out as well. I suppose it's not just what we do, but others need to accelerate in this area, and it is an expensive thing to do. It is very technical. It's as technical as building out your origination, your front end. Having a technology-driven back end is expensive, and there's a lot of cost to accelerate. And at Arrow we help out, I suppose in 3 elements. There is a drive for non-voice, but the first step in driving non-voice is having great data, and we see people investing significantly on customer data so they can enable non-voice channels. And there's a great stat that floats around Arrows. Some people we work with, they have a 6% penetration of digital data in their files. I mean, how do you drive non-voice when that's what your legacy is? So step one is building that out before you even think about augmenting digital channels. Yeah.
Same with you, Gary. Any kind of instances for you, new versions of customer engagement changing your business, or any change in voice versus digital?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really interested just listening to what Jim was saying about, I think there has to be an acknowledgement that telephony of some description might always be with us, because I think the answer to this question actually sits squarely around about what your customer base looks like and how it's been constructed as well. When I think about British Gas, for example, I mean, we've got, like I said, around 7 million residential energy customers. Some of those customers have been with us, since as far back as the privatisation of the energy industry in this country. But I absolutely believe that it's possible to have an end-to-end digital journey in collections for some of them. But I can say with some certainty that a group of those customers will still want to have some sort of voice interaction, especially when it comes to matters of debt, financial difficulty, vulnerability, these types of things. And I think the key is how you create targeted contact. I think it was, I think Jim was also saying that if you're looking at your sort of 5-year plan, and you're not thinking about driving down contact centre, FTE headcount cost, then it's going to be a really challenging environment for that particular organisation. But I do think that it's about how you target that contact. It's something I'm really passionate about. Something we've actually been working on, prior to the pandemic at British Gas. My view is that, if you've got customers who want to communicate, they will communicate with you. If you've got customers who don't want to communicate, then they tend not to. But if you've got customers who want to communicate with you and they can't do that in a way that's comfortable and safe and suitable for them, then you're going to have a group of customers who are sort of in the middle, who will turn into customers who don't want to communicate. And I think, I think I'm like that, when I'm a customer, when it comes to interacting with any type of business that I'm using. If I don't like how they communicate to me or the choices that they give me in terms of how I can communicate, then I'll avoid it for as long as I need to. So I think when it comes to matters of debt and financial difficulty, I think we're still probably not quite there in terms of the, sort of wholesale chatbot introduction, but we've started to use combinations of two-way SMS, web chat, and giving customers the choice, to talk to us on those channels at different points across the collections journey. And I think that's something that's really important.
Cool. Oh, no, interesting. And Mark, I guess you've got a different view on that.
No. Do you know what?
Yeah.
My view there would be
your answer. Apologies.
No, my answer there would be it is interesting, and I would agree that look, we're promoting digital channels and all the rest, but I would be quite frankly mad to say to a client, you can do everything via digital. You will need to, and as Gary and as Jim said, there are certain circumstances you are going to have to speak with somebody, and that is about conversational design, though. That how you design the conversation, the digital conversation, to exception manage, to be able to bring that level of, well, actually, it's now right and appropriate that we bring somebody into a proper conversation on a phone with an agent. Because undoubtedly, look, the FTE headcount in 5 years' time will be slightly less. It will not go completely. And, that sort of all the call centers will be gone and it'll all be done by chatbots is complete nonsense. Now, what I would say, though, is that, collections conversations, there is a complexity to them. So they're not the easiest to just immediately automate. Now, saying that, a lot can be done in a very short space of time. And I'm just thinking of examples of clients of our own. Within a 3-month period, they've got to between about 40 and about 60% automation. So that's a huge, step forward in a collections conversation. So these things are possible with relative ease. There shouldn't be a huge amount of heavy lifting, but it's about that conversational design, making sure that you are looking at all the different factors that you will need to build into that, rather than just being blinkered to say, we want to push everybody down a certain route, because quite frankly, you will leave people behind. And it is about trying to be inclusive. But also, I would say it's about the language that you use as well, is making sure that, when you're doing a different channel, don't just use the same approach that you would use on the phone or something else. It's about being appropriate in that channel as well. So, there's a lot of different aspects, rather than just going, let's put everybody through a chatbot or let's put everybody through web chat. So, but the idea of it everybody will be doing it that way, and there won't be phone. I'm not a you know, I wouldn't be an advocate of that. It's about getting the right channels at the right time for the right type of customer.
And Amon, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think from my perspective, right, I think on the highest level, you want to give customers a way to solve their problems, right? I think communications is a means to an end, right? If you design a journey that is completely self-explanatory and the customer can do whatever they need to do, they will not talk to you, right? And so from my perspective, on the highest level, what you actually have to figure out is how can you use a digital journey in itself where you absolutely reduce the amount of inbound contact, right? That's the most important aspect of it. Because if you do that, and if you have a well-designed journey, fewer people will talk to you in the first place. And then it comes down to, I agree, I don't believe that you can just switch off the phone channel. Some people will want to talk to you on the phone, and they should be able to. I think then it's a matter of, what type of optionality do you give the customer, and how can they talk to you easily at their own time and their own pace. I've worked in AI and machine learning for my entire career. I think chatbots to a certain level are a little bit overrated in the sense of how they can actually solve customer issues. I think it's more about augmenting agents. It's more on the back end. How can you actually give tools in the hands of your agents so they can operate in a more efficient and more customer-friendly way? And that's where I believe automation will actually drive. I don't believe it's going to be in the front end, it's going to be in the back end of it. Mm-hmm. But I think in the highest level, we talk about comms a lot, and I get that, but it's not about comms. It's actually about giving customers the ability to solve their problems on their own at their own time, and that might be on Sunday at midnight. And then if they have questions, then obviously they can flock into the phone lines or communications line via chat or SMS or WhatsApp or whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it's about finding that right balance is the feedback I'm getting from you all there.
Yeah, just on that point, Amon, I think you're Amon, on that point, you're absolutely right. It's that giving people the time to give considered answers. Like on the phone, quite frankly, you're going to be on a phone to an agent. You'll tell them what you think they need to hear. So, that considered answer at 10 in the evening when they've got time to think about it, the quality of the conversations is better. And we get that feedback from our clients. So it's a good point that you raise.
Exactly. Thank you. And I guess another thing to consider with furlough ending, it's generally accepted, but we think, we talk about this debt tsunami and vulnerability is going to be higher. I've seen lots of stats around that. I mean, how does everybody think businesses can handle this across their channels? Any thoughts on that? Gary, I guess, start with you on that one. With the spike that's happening.
In terms of vulnerability?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's it is a fragile climate now. I think it was even beforehand, and obviously the rise and identification of vulnerability was getting was becoming more and more prominent. But I think that a couple of the guys today have mentioned empathy, and I think some of the things that we need to think about, I think, over the next sort of year to 18 months, 2 years is firstly is re-engaging with customers. I think is really important. I think certainly speaking from my perspective, we adapted our comms approach to acknowledge the impacts of COVID and how that was, affecting our customer base. But I think that needs to be a starting point almost now again, a sort of refresh point. I think not acknowledging, the fact that things have changed for customers in terms of their circumstances and their needs, demonstrates a bit of an ignorance, and it would be quite easy, I think, to go back to the standard approach, the pre-pandemic letters and messages and emails. But I think although it might be quite an arduous task across the board, I think we have to acknowledge with customers how difficult things have been. And then I think things have obviously changed in terms of the way that customers, react and behave with us. And I think that we have to adapt to that as well. I think, even when we think about things like payment models and propositions, for customers, yes, more customers might be vulnerable. Some of those customers might be more financially vulnerable. But if you can adapt the ways that you allow customers to pay and interact and do business with you, then, I think you can potentially mitigate, some of those challenges that customers might have. I think about things like, the way customers' employment patterns have changed. So, customers, will want to potentially pay for things differently, when it comes to household bills and utilities. That sort of payment pattern might become a bit more sporadic. Customers might want more flexibility than before. I think that will absolutely be the case, especially with growth of sectors like the gig economy, and that's projected to grow exponentially in sort of the end of this year and into 2022 as well. So we have to think about the types of payment options we give to customers, the propositions that we give them. Obviously, the introduction of things like breathing space, from the insolvency service is starting to play into that. That increasing, challenge and vulnerability that customers face, and giving them some protection. But I think businesses need to do more on that front as well. So, can we give customers the option to pay in different ways, pay at different frequencies, pay at times that suit them, have payment breaks if they need to do that. Because the challenge that we're balancing against here, and although that vulnerability is on the rise, I think cost and efficacy of collections is also in the spotlight for businesses. So you've got to find that balance between empathy and accelerating, the debt journeys, because organisations can't afford to allow customers to age, significantly through those collections processes. And that descent into later stage treatments for customers might be sharper. But I think as long as you're improving that engagement and choice for the customer up front, then you're obviously taking steps to try and mitigate as much of that late debt as possible. So it's a watch point for all parties, that balance between vulnerability, but also reducing effort and cost, in the organisation.
Yeah. And Jim, any thoughts from you on that?
I suppose I was trying to drag from my mind. There was a survey by Money Advice, I think 2018, where they said 80% of customers don't get debt advice when they need it. And given what we're going to face into next year, that becomes quite a big population of customers. And I suppose my reflection on this is, the models that we have today, or that people have deployed over the last few years, aren't serving the vast majority of the market. And it's not because people don't offer forbearance and it's not available. It's because of the stigma attached to trying to get that advice. So I do think over the next couple of years, there needs to be a huge acceleration to innovation in our sector. And you can either deploy that through significant investment and almost professionalizing the collections environment, almost to the same level of technical capability as we've developed, underwriting and origination, or it's available to everybody to reach out to specialists. And I think over the next 12 months, there will either be a huge investment in arrears management and supporting customers' vulnerabilities, or there's going to be a significant migration to outsource collections as a service to specialists. And there's a few on this call, and I think that will be a phenomenon of next year.
Okay, and Amon, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Jim.
Yeah.
I agree with Jim. I think when we look at the data, people don't, reach out to that advice as much as they should. And I think, partially, lenders are oftentimes also overwhelmed because they don't have the scale, they don't have necessarily expertise oftentimes in-house to deal with the problem the way it should. what you're seeing, if you look at fintechs, look at the Monzos of the world, the Starlings of the world, and you look at other kind of businesses that done really, really well, kind of on the innovative side, what we've seen in those kind of business areas is that they have had a almost maniacal focus on their core strengths as a business, and they've also almost given out everything else that they don't see as a core strength of their business. And similar to how Jim would say that their core strength is collections, or that purchase ours is collections. And so we would say that we are probably one of the best in the world on it, specifically within digital channels. And my gut tells me that you will find more and more lenders that will come to that realization over the next few years, driven by customer demand, right? Everything that we do, everything is ultimately driven by consumer demand, right? We don't, we don't do digital because we want to do digital, because we believe that consumers prefer that method of communication. If consumers would prefer using phone, we would, all drive to phone channels, right? And so, in my eyes, it's about what do consumers want, and how is the market, how are market dynamics changing? And in my mind, because everything is becoming more competitive, it's now easier than ever to set up your own business. It's now easier than ever to raise investment, to scale your business quickly. Larger organizations will get challenged more and more, and they will have the realization, and probably most of them have it already, that they will need to focus on their core business. And everything else will probably get passed on to technology companies or specialists.
I really agree.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm conscious of time and questions we've got coming in. We've had quite a few. I was going to give you a chance to have a look at this, Mark. So I've had a question from Gary at Perch, and he says, what technology will improve collections productivity? Is there a healthy target for cost to collect as a ratio? What is the role of data and machine learning for the future collections? Sorry, a lot in there. Any thoughts on that, Mark?
Sorry, the line went a bit wobbly there, Colin. Could you read that again? Sorry.
He's asked what technology will improve collections productivity, and what is a healthy target, in your opinion, for the cost to collect as a ratio? Any thoughts on that, or is that a bit too?
No. One of the things that we see is. And to be honest, probably Gary and Jim are seeing this already. When you move to digital conversations, and let's just pick one channel, I don't want to go over them all, but a simple starting with SMS or WhatsApp, two of them are similar in that regard. So from a productivity point of view, a phone call is 1-on-1. Web chat is probably 1-on-3. What we see is that the likes of a digital conversation, it's asynchronous. That an agent can handle between 8 and about 15 conversations at a time. So from an efficiency point of view, that's one of the great untalked subjects that, why do people want to move into digital? Because actually it will deliver from an efficiency point of view. It'll blow any of your metrics out of the water. And it's about sort of understanding that. Also, what we see from an efficiency point of view is that because you're on the digital channel, and Amon mentioned it earlier, that it's Sunday, it's 11 o'clock, somebody responds. Can you actually help somebody in that conversation at that time? Absolutely, you can. We do that with our clients all the time. As I say, a lot of out of hours conversations are fully automated. So that's where the efficiencies would really come from. I think you mentioned sort of AI and ML as well.
Yeah, I wanted to see how that was plugged in.
And that really, and that would be for us. There's lots of, there's lots of bullshit. Let's just call a spade, talked about AI and bots. And I know it's complete BS. When I was at the dentist and I'm reading a golf magazine, and they talk about a golf club having AI, and I'm sort of going, what? AI in a golf club? However, but so there's a lot of marketing nonsense talked about it. We like to keep it simple. I mentioned it earlier, but it was really powerful. That Webio Propensity Studio, it's looking at the conversation, it's looking at the historical data, and it's working out what the most likely outcome is. And it's helping the agent, but it's also deciding on then what's the best next route. So the likes of vulnerability, the likes of promise to pay, the likes of, so, you know, as a business, we're helping people design much more personalized journeys that you're cutting out all the inefficiency and you're giving people what they want. So you marry up those two, where you're getting a digital channel that you have huge efficiencies, you add automation, and then you add that sort of more personalized journey. It can very quickly can turn into a very powerful but incredibly effective way of engaging with clients. So there's a lot to be said there. Now, look, there's 3 separate topics I talked about in one. You could take 20 minutes, a half an hour on each, but it's about getting that blend right. And I think, just really following on from the last question, lots of people for a long time in big organizations would talk about, do we build or buy? More and more people are going down the buy route from specialists, understanding, you know, who are the experts in the room, get them in, listen to them, let them do the work for you, or at least listen to their advice. And that's something that we're seeing more and more, where people want to get not just to talk about the technology, they also want to talk about what's best practice, how do we get the most from this. So there's a lot there.
Lovely.
I promise I'll be quiet.
No, it's all right. I asked you, so I don't expect you to be quiet. That's great. So conscious of time, and we haven't even got through half the stuff we want to get through, and the questions we've had coming in has been 6 or 7. So apologies to everybody who's asking them. We're not going to get through them. I think we're getting near roundup time, but we
can provide answers to questions offline. So I don't think
exactly. Yeah, no, we're going to do a write up at the end on that, and we'll put that on the website. So feel free to do that. But I just wanted to get final thoughts, and we've got just over 5 minutes. So I wanted, and we can go over slightly, but Jim, round up and get in the future. Can we predict the future of collections? You know, obviously there's going to be and the challenges that operations are going to have. Is there any thoughts on that?
I think it's all of the above, isn't it? I mean, there's just a theme, so I don't want to really overplay the theme. But I suppose the thing that did jump to mind when Mark was chatting, it's not a proliferation of channels, because I think that's just going to annoy the consumer. I don't think that's going to move us forward. I think it's how channels are augmented and they work with each other, and I think that's going to be the trick. How do you engage with the customer and be seamless across channels? And I think the winners in this sector going forward are going to be the people that manage to stitch all the channels together to be seamless, and customers can step through a channel of choice through their journey, flipping from channel to channel. I don't think this is a race to proliferate channels and bolt on channels to an operation. And I would advise to think through the model and make sure when you add something, it's added seamlessly for the consumer, or it's just gonna not move us forward.
Okay. And Amon, any quick minute or so on what your thoughts are?
Yeah, to be honest, I think the answer is beyond collections. I think collections is the first step. I think we've as a society, we've talked a lot about mental health in the past. Financial health is, I think, the next big topic, and collections is a starting point for that. I think it allows the best organizations to be the ones that build upon the relationship with the customer throughout the collections process to actually help them rehabilitate, educate, and then ultimately prevent. It will become about prevention long term. And I think that one thing that strikes me in the industry is that most organizations don't think beyond collections. For them, it's the second you have recovered, the relationship is over. And I think there's a huge opportunity to build upon that relationship that you build with the customer to ultimately help them prevent financial health problems to happen in the first place.
Okay. And Mark, if you could be brief.
Yeah.
Sorry to be rude.
No. I firstly agree with Jim. It's not about a proliferation. It's about joining channels and making sure it can be a great customer experience. One example comes to mind It's one of our Italian clients. The agent is on the phone, all through one screen. They click a button, a WhatsApp goes out to them. They need to get pictures of some type forms of identification. They take a picture and the conversation continues on. That would have taken a week previously. So to send stuff in post and what have you. So they absolutely. And for sure, from the point of view of, dealing with people, we've seen a huge change, and we try to advocate this, that it's about conversation rather than the collections industry for too long has all been about command based. Do this, you must ring us on this number. That I think needs to change. And actually, when it does change, you'll get better results. And we see that all the time. So that would be my 2 points on that.
Great, thanks. And Gary, finally, you just a quick thought from you as well. Sorry to...
Yeah, very quickly, Colin.
Yeah.
I guess just building on everything that the guys have just sort of summarised there, I think the key thing, from my point of view is, if you are going to use self-service, don't create self-service dead ends for customers. I think that is something that's really key. I think one of the most, common self-serve journeys is, pay journeys. Can you pay? But there's two answers to that question. Yes, I can, or no, I can't pay. Now, if you don't have a journey that helps customers to tell you why they can't pay, and to then help them solve in some way using, as Jim and Amon sort of, alluded to, you allow them to move seamlessly between channels, all you're creating is dropout and potentially, fall back in, somewhere else in the journey. So we are using a combination of channels now, but we're also giving customers the opportunity to tell us, where things aren't working for them, where they can't pay, where they can't do something that they should or want to. And our NPS, on our self-serve and non-voice channels is anywhere between 10 and 20 points higher than our voice channels. Wow. It's about creating it, comfortably end to end, and particularly in collections, giving customers a secure and safe environment, to deal with things at their own pace. But also in a way where they can share sensitive information, and feel secure in doing that. So, I would say don't create dead ends for customers. Try and find ways to give them options and choice.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gary. That's really good. It was really good. And clearly, this is a massive conversation, obviously, anyway. And we are, as Jim mentioned earlier, we're going to round this up on our site. So we'll send all the questions that have been sent into our panelists, and they can answer them. Really pleased to announce that we're going to be running next month, or not next month, on the 4th of November, our Credit and Collections Technology Conference, think tank, which is taking place on the day of our Credit and Collections Technology Awards. So we want to maybe invite a couple of these panelists along to that one and talk about customer engagement as part of a larger face-to-face event. So that'd be great. So hopefully we can get that set up as well with some of these panelists. But we're going to have to round up now. We're running so short on time, we've overran. So apologies for anybody who's had to leave the call early. This is being recorded as well, so we'll share this at a later date. But I'd like to round up by thanking Gary, Jim, and Amon for their insight, and of course Mark as well, and Webio, who sponsors this session. Great to thank them as well. Thank everybody who's joined us. Everybody's put in questions, contributed to our opinion polls as well. We're going to begin our next session on affordability and vulnerability. Have a tune into that if you can. That starts at 10:45. So I've got to have a quick drink before we get into the next one. Not just a cup of tea, not a strong one. We'll see how it goes. But of course, feel free to the next session. And thanks to everybody. And we'll say goodbye for now. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Bye.